On Tuesday, Terry Francona continued his media carousel. This time he landed on the Lance McAllister show, 1530 ESPN radio. Gave us a number of interesting clips throughout that interview, including this one about getting caught up to speed with the Reds organization.
Where I think for the first few days, like I really need to do more listening than anything. And they're doing a really good job of trying to bring me up to date on the organization and things like that. And yes, we do have to take care of the coaching staff. And there's going to be a number of coaches that stay put because they're good coaches. But we also will probably be bringing in a few new coaches. Those are things we're going to have to work through. And the timetable of it is kind of fluid for a lot of reasons.
So a couple of things that can come out of that one, obviously, Nick. We'll start with just the basics. I mean, any new leader that comes into an organization, the first thing you do is you come in and you just listen and you learn as much as you can. So that part, not a big surprise. He goes on to talk about, though, the coaching search and bringing in new coaches, and he does mention the fact that he's going to have some new faces around the organization. I would imagine that extends beyond just coaching staff, probably some other people in the front office and other areas that'll assist him in his day-to-day. So, no real surprise. Day two, essentially on the job, a lot of looking and listening and figuring out what's going on. But, what's your takeaway from the first 2 days of Terry Francona?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is who's going to be like his right-hand man, because he had that with Brad Mills. I know I talked about that before in Cleveland for most of his tenure there. He had a former manager. I think there's a good chance he hires a former manager to be his number two. And to be quite honest, it's not going to happen. But a guy like David Bell would literally be the perfect guy to be Terry Francona's number two. Not David Bell, but a guy that kind of has that fit. I think would honestly be perfect for him. I know there was a little bit of buzz about Kevin Youkilis. I know he did an interview on a local TV station in Cincinnati. Was that, him kind of, putting some feelers out there? I don't know. I know that it was reported that Youkilis interviewed for Francona's open hitting coach position in Cleveland, that Chris Valaika, the former Reds, obscure former Red, ended up getting the job and did, by all accounts, a great job in Cleveland. So, yeah, I mean, obviously Youkilis played for Francona in Boston. I know he didn't really love Cincinnati, the Reds organization, because they passed on him going to UC, being a local guy. But it would be really cool to have Kevin Youkilis, the Greek god of walks, if you've watched Moneyball, which I'm sure everyone has. But yeah, that's definitely a name to watch. But I do think that there's a good chance, and then they're not saying it, that the reason it might take a while is because there's probably some people that Francona has his eye on, that their team is still playing in the postseason.
Yeah, I would expect a number of people who are still in the postseason to have their names thrown around in terms of roles with the Cincinnati Reds and on Terry Francona's staff. It was interesting. I don't know if you saw it or not, but the WWT interview, they brought up the fact that Kevin Youkilis had some interesting comments in the past, and even most recently making some comments about the ownership and needing to invest in the roster for Terry Francona. And when asked about being a hitting coach, said being a hitting coach isn't too rewarding, but that he'd entertain a potential bench coach role on Terry's staff, which I thought was interesting for a guy who literally isn't coaching. So to expect to just come in and be the bench coach right off the bat is certainly a task. And again, like you said, I think he still lives in the area, a Cincinnati guy. Despite his comments, I believe loved by a lot of Reds fans for his time in Cincinnati. So wouldn't be surprised to see him have some sort of role with the Reds. I would be surprised if it's an official coaching role on the bench during game days at this point, but time will tell. Another interesting clip from Francona on the Lance McAllister show, specifically talking about the Reds' high strikeout rate in 2024.
Terry, this is a game that in this day and age, there's a lot of strikeouts, and strikeouts seem to be accepted a lot more than they used to be. Is that something can that improve on this team, or is it a matter of it being the way the game is today?
To answer that, I hope it can improve. It used to be where, the guys that hit the ball out of the ballpark, you could put up with their strikeouts because, they were driving the ball out of the ballpark and driving in runs. And you're right, somewhere along the way in our game, it became accepted that everybody could strike out. So I think you're talking about balance. Again, if you've got guys in the middle of the order, you want them to try to hit the ball a long way. I mean, I get it. But there's times when, situational hitting, you need some contact. And those are things that we're going to try to drive home. And, we're going to have a new hitting team in place. So then that's going to take a little while. But you're right. Seeing guys able to make adjustments, sometimes it's, getting some at-bats under their belt at the major league level, understanding what they can do with certain pitches and certain counts. There's a lot that goes into it. But to the short part of your answer is yes, I hope we do make more contact.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody and their brother thinks that it would be great if we can reduce the number of strikeouts. I think if we could strike out as a team less than 100 times for 2025, we'd all be great. But the truth of the matter is that you're going to have guys that are striking out 100 and 150 times a year, most likely. And to Tito's point, I mean, I think one of the reasons that we put up with Elly De La Cruz's high strikeout rate is because he launched 25 plus home runs and he stole however many bases he ended up with this year. I feel like a terrible fan for not knowing that number off the top of my head, but nonetheless, I mean, he brought so many other things that you kind of forgave it. And Terry talked about it back in the day. I mean, Mark McGwire struck out a ton, but he also was hitting 70 bombs, so you didn't really think about it. And having that balance really does make a difference, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Reds struck out 24.4% as a team. The Detroit Tigers struck out 24.3% as a team. I don't think anyone's talking about the Detroit Tigers' amount of strikeouts this year. I know a lot of it was Javi Baez. I'm sure he inflated that a little bit. But again, there is something to it, though. I mean, if you do look, the top 5 teams in strikeout rate were the Padres and the best Padres, Astros, Royals, Diamondbacks, and Guardians. So, I mean, they all had some success, but you do have some teams that strike out a lot. Elly De La Cruz, I think, will get better at that. I think Shohei Ohtani, look at his first couple years. He still strikes out at a pretty decent clip, but nowhere near the numbers. So he'll get better with that. I don't know. I don't make too much out of strikeouts. I think that's such a hot topic that doesn't mean that much. I don't know. You need guys that get on base, that produce runs, and if they strike out 20% or 25%, doesn't really matter that much. It matters how many runs they're producing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like Terry said, it all comes down to balance, and you can forgive certain things when you're getting other things out of those players. And I think, like you mentioned specifically Shohei Ohtani, I think that's a great example. Yeah, Elly De La Cruz struck out 218 times this year. I get it, and that's too many. Shohei Ohtani struck out 162 times this year. It's not like he didn't strike out. It's just that Shohei Ohtani also added 54 home runs, 130 RBI. I mean, yeah, you're going to forgive 162 strikeouts when you're hitting 310. The problem is when you're Elly De La Cruz and you're hitting 259, you get a lot of people who don't want to look over those strikeouts. And the other thing that Tito said that I thought was interesting and really kind of hit on the point, and something that I think a lot of Reds fans got frustrated with this year, including yourself and Trace, and that's situational hitting and just situational awareness as a whole. And that was something that when Terry Francona was first hired, we talked about how he was going to set the tone and how he was going to come in, create a culture around situational awareness and just being a smarter ball player.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't know if it's situational as much as if just wasn't enough good hitters, right? I mean, I think that's always what it comes down to this year. There was times there was 3, 4, 5 guys in the lineup that were either not big leaguers or fringe big leaguers at best. And I think that makes everything feel worse, right? That makes every single problem that you have offensively feel worse, just because they're guys that aren't in the big leagues. I mean, the Reds roster overall offensively was the same roster that everyone fell in love with in 2023, right? But they had a healthier roster. They had guys that were performing better, and they still struck out a lot, right? But when you're scoring runs and you're winning, everything feels better. Your situational hitting feels better, even though, your average with runners in the scoring position versus your average with runners in the scoring position, and based on your entire numbers year to year, it doesn't really change that much. I think it all comes down to just not having enough good hitters.
Sure. And hopefully the Reds will address that this offseason. This next clip, I'm not even going to give much of an intro to. All I'm going to say is that it brought a tear to Nick Kirby's eye.
Pretty safe to say in 1992, you weren't being handed a lot of analytics to look at and decipher. I wonder how you view the role of analytics today and the evolution and how that impacts the game.
I was so fortunate that I went out to Oakland as a bench coach in 2003, and they were kind of at the leading edge of that, and I learned so much. And then when I went to Boston, it just kind of grew from there. I guess my feeling is I feel like I owe it to the team and the organization not to guess. Now, does that mean that you go with every single number that? No. I mean, there's times where we might be trying to get a young player over the hump, or, there's various reasons. But like I said, I feel an obligation to at least know the numbers, because you want, like I said, I don't want to guess. I want to make good decisions.
Nick, I'm just going to let you talk about this one. I don't even need to ask you a question. I know your thoughts.
No, it's great to hear. I think there was this massive misconception that Terry Francona is this old school manager, and I was like, I don't think people actually understand what happened in Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland was at the top of the most analytical teams, and Terry Francona was their manager for over a decade. So yeah, again, this is not a surprise to me. I'm glad that it was actually verbalized so Reds fans could hear it from the horse's mouth. But yeah, look, is there a team in baseball that's actually hiring a manager that isn't going to trust analytics? Like, I think Tony La Russa and Buck Showalter were probably the last two guys that are going to get that opportunity, unless there's just some wacko out there owner that says, I'm going to do it the other way just to kind of, I don't know, sell tickets or something. But again, all these teams are using analytics. And I go back to, I don't think there's really going to be that big of a difference in the day-to-day, the managing, the preparation between David Bell and Terry Francona. But Terry Francona is going to deliver that message and appease fans a lot more. And that's what I think is going to make the whole situation better.
Yeah, and he mentioned, going out to Oakland in 2003. And for context, the movie Moneyball is based on the 2002 Oakland A's season. So, he's going out there in the prime of the Moneyball era, working with Billy Beane. We talked about his kind of roster creation and roster makeup in Cleveland and in Boston, and how he went about doing that. And it really did start with his time in Oakland. And I wouldn't be shocked again. We talked about it when they first hired him. He's going to be impacting decisions that this front office makes. I don't think there's any real question about that. He's going to be involved in the future of this organization from a roster makeup standpoint. And before we get into the last clip, it's interesting. I mean, we talked about roster makeup, and so it makes sense to talk about it now. But, it was brought up today that budget meetings for 2025 will happen at the end of this month. Obviously, that'll help shape this offseason, but that analytics piece is going to play into their decision making as it pertains to this roster, along with the budget that they have. And so, Nick, if let's say the budget meetings are at the end of October, when are you as a fan, as a content creator, as a diehard baseball lover, when are you going to start to evaluate the way things are going for the Reds, knowing that the budget won't be set till the end of October?
I don't have a good answer for you, Craig, to be honest. I don't know how this offseason is going to go. There was a report today about how the Diamondbacks, or sorry, not the Diamondbacks, the Guardians, Brewers, and Twins, Major League Baseball is going to take over their broadcasts. So Bally's done with them. The Reds just continue to be that one team that keeps hanging on. And it's because the Reds get great numbers. And I think the Reds have a pretty crappy contract compared to a lot of other teams. And a good contract for Bally plus really good numbers based on the market size is probably the reason that the Reds will be one of the last teams standing with Bally. But that's just another thing that just continues to throw a wrench into this. I think that if the Reds stick with Bally this off season and they get some clarity on that, I think it's probably a good sign for 2025. But it's just going to continue to be a cloud that hovers over the Reds. And at some point, you want to get out from Bally, even though it's going to hurt in the short term, because in the long term, you're going to be able to get your game and your players into a lot more households. I saw one of the teams went from having the ability from 1 million people in their region to have access to the games to 4 million. And that might be MLB fluffing the numbers a little bit, but it does make sense because it's going to be a lot easier to access. So to kind of long-winded answer your question here, Craig, I don't know. I mean, I think you could get to the end of December, and I think Reds fans will be really frustrated because the team didn't do much. I think there's a good chance that the Reds are making a lot of trades. So when do you make trades? Well, it's when you can find a partner. And if the Reds find a partner on November 15th, I think they make the trade if they think it's a great deal. If they are finagling into right before spring training, I think that's a possibility too. So I would be patient this offseason. My guess is you're going to get a mixed bag amongst this fan base at the end of the offseason. They're going to have some that go, yeah, you know what? They did some pretty nice things. They did some good moves. And you have people that are going to say they didn't do nearly enough. That's my guess at what it ends up to. When it happens, though, I have no idea.
One final clip from Terry Francona's appearance today on the Lance McAllister show. From the minute David Bell was let go, one of the key topics that has been touched on not only by Nick Kroll, but by multiple players, by all the fans, by everybody, far and wide, is accountability.
How do you define accountability? How do you enforce accountability?
Well, and again, it's a good question. It's hard to answer when you don't know the players yet. One, I think I have a responsibility, not just a responsibility, but when I get to know these guys and you start to build trust and you start to build loyalty, inevitably when you're in a position of leadership, you're going to have to tell some guys some things they don't want to hear. But again, when you've built that trust, you can do that. I do not think hammering some kid in the media, I don't believe that's accountability. That to me is, I think there's a way to be honest with the media and the fans without crushing a player. I do not believe in that, but I certainly believe in being accountable and starting with me.
Certainly sounds a little bit like Tito has some experience in this, Nick, and I think that's going to be a big thing coming into 2025 is that he's been doing this for a long time. 19 seasons as a major league manager. He knows how to hold people accountable. And every coach, manager, assistant coach that you talk to, I spent 15 years in college athletics being around coaches, and every single one of them will tell you the exact same thing, is that their job is to love hard and to coach harder. And it's all about building relationships, getting to know your players, getting to know what makes them tick, and understanding what they respond to. There are certain players that if you berate them and yell at them, they're going to completely shut down and you're not going to be able to get anything out of them. There are other players that if you go about it softly and you try to say, hey, look, that's not the way we do things here. When you really need you to be better, this is the expectations. They're just going to stomp all over you. And you've really got to take the time to get to know your players. And like you said, build that trust, build that loyalty so that it is when you come and you have to hold people accountable that they understand it's coming from a good place. And Terry Francona, with 19 seasons as a manager, knows how to do that. And so for all of those fans who are clamoring for, David Bell to be willing to throw guys under the bus in the media and everything else, I don't think you're going to get that with Terry Francona. But I don't think there's going to be any question about whether or not he's holding these guys accountable.
Well, number one, he's just going to relay it so much better than David Bell. It is what it is. It's going to be so much better. He's going to do it with some humor at times. He's going to, I'll say it, manipulate the media. I mean, I think he'll manipulate the media because he's so lovable. Everyone's going to love him. They're going to love covering Terry Francona. He's probably legitimately the most enjoyable manager if you're a beat reporter to cover on a daily basis. So those guys all lucked out. But yeah, I mean, he'll handle that well, and he's going to take so much pressure off of everyone because of how he handles it. But one thing that I think Francona, and he's talked about it in his presser. I watched a really good podcast. I would encourage you, Corey Kluber's podcast. He actually released it like the day, but I think it was recorded before he took the job, but it was pretty recent. And he talked a lot about how he wants player leadership. And I think he's going to work on establishing that. I think he wants the players to hold each other accountable. He doesn't want to be the guy that's in the way. And I mean, I think that overall is good. I don't think you want a manager that has their hands too deep in the water where could just kind of create strife. Yeah, I mean, the Reds have some players I think certainly have those qualities, and I think that a guy like Terry Francona will probably do a really good job of fostering those relationships and helping and empower those players to become better leaders.
I think being empowered is a big thing for sure, to know that, as a player, that it's okay if you want to hold other people accountable. And that not only comes from the top, but it comes from other players and the fact of how they respond to those moments. And you mentioned Frankie Montas earlier on in this show. I mean, it was well documented throughout 2024 season about how he took this young pitching staff under his wing and really served as kind of a mentor for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he had to be, an in the face accountable guy, but he was right there. The starting pitchers had their own little bench area in the dugout, and they were all there, and they were always talking about whatever it may have been, whether it's approach to games or certain batters or, just talking about nothing. But at the end of the day, you had that veteran presence where guys could kind of pick their brain. And so, when we talk about starting pitching depth and the need to add that veteran, Terry's got 19 years. I'm sure he's going to be able to find somebody who's going to fit into this clubhouse as a leader. And he's going to find a way to probably bring in a couple other veterans to be able to serve as that leader, because, we somewhat jokingly talk about Jonathan India and being a leader of men and all of these other things. But the fact of the matter is that when you look at this ball club outside of Frankie Montas from a position player standpoint, you didn't really see a whole lot of leadership happening. And I know a lot of that stuff can happen behind the scenes, and I wouldn't expect to see a whole lot of it. But we heard a whole lot more from these players after David Bell was fired about accountability than we ever did during the season. And there was a way that they could have addressed this, and there definitely could have been relayed to the media in a way that made sense if necessary. But, it just didn't feel like that necessarily was the case. And so I think this offseason is a big one for Terry Francona in establishing that culture. Every new coach has to come in and really establish that culture quickly. And, the thing that we've heard from Terry Francona that is interesting, and we heard it in his press conference on Monday, is that he's already spent the time to reach out to every single player, to reach out to every staff member, and to really start building those relationships. And I think that come February, when pitchers and catchers report, that relationship that he's building now is really going to go a long way come this spring and into 2025.
Yeah, I agree with you, Craig. And there was a lot of comments that came out. I didn't really love them. I feel like if you're a player that's reached arbitration in your career, you shouldn't be talking about not having someone lead you. Like, lead yourself. and be a leader. I don't want to, like, those quotes just become very hollow to me. And whether it's true or not, I just, that doesn't sit well. And I don't think Terry Francona will I don't think he liked those comments about the guy he's taking over for. I think he'd want, be a leader yourself. Don't say you need a leader, especially if you're a guy that's played in the big leagues for a few seasons.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, for better or for worse, is that there's a lot of clips out there of players who have clearly gone through media training and players who have not gone through media training. There was a couple recently from college football world that stand out in terms of guys that have gone through that and guys that haven't gone through that. And the other thing I'll say is that most front offices and most general managers or athletic directors at the college level, whatever it may be, when they make a decision like this to move on from a manager or head coach, they're taking the time and they're going and meeting with the team. And that meeting with the team is not just about communicating the decision, but then it's also to begin the conversation around what do you want to see in your next manager. Now, many times the general manager or AD may or may not take that feedback to heart, but my gut tells me that internally that was the message that was conveyed, whether it was from Nick Krall to the players or from the players to Nick Krall, or maybe both of them. But ultimately, then when you turn around and you get these guys in a situation where they're being asked about what they want, they're going to revert back to the things that they've heard the most commonly. And ultimately, the fact that the messages are so similar really makes me believe that they're kind of, I don't want to say it's spewing because they probably believe it, but they're conveying a message that they've been told themselves. And so I agree with you that I don't love that came out in the media and that some of the comments were probably not in good faith. But at the end of the day, I think the reasoning is the same. And I think, we talked about whether or not the Reds really knew that they were going to hire Terry Francona before they even made the decision about David Bell. And it just makes me wonder, did they, really drive home this accountability piece to the players before the players ever got in front of the media as part of that kind of decision to move on from David Bell?
Yeah, that last thing you said, a good point, and probably something that was kind of fed their way. We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health. Whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between, it's a 100% confidential, secure, and an anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay.